Okay, so one of the things I'm trying to do is to make visible a number of sort of patterns I've seen in politics that play out again and again and again. And these patterns, they're really, they're separate from the normal political coalitions, I think. I don't think these patterns are as simple as here's where the Republicans are all the same and here's where all the Democratic issues are all the same. These patterns reach across those normal partisan coalitions. So one of them is rationality versus irrationality. That is what I've seen time and time again. It might sound weird to say that some people in politics embrace irrationality, but there's something very human about irrationality. There's something very natural and organic about human beings being able to make their own sort of irrational choices. And so the way I'm going to establish that today, it's going to come up again and again, but today I'm going to talk about the police and policing. So when we talk about the police, a lot of times the problem, that's supposedly the problem with the police, is like racial biases. In other words, it's a form of personal irrationality. A lot of the blame is put on individual police officers and their sort of irrational behavior. And in the name of this irrationality, of solving this irrational behavior of subconscious racial biases, right? They're not even racial biases you'd be aware of. They're in the back of your mind. In the name of solving these things, we call for racial sensitivity training or the establishment of national standards for policing, so that individual local police departments have clear behavioral guidelines from above, so that they can't get like an isolated police culture. And generally we call for more training, right? Because a lot of people will say, can you believe it only takes 6 months to become a police officer? You know, why can I become a police officer more easily than I can become a massage therapist or what have you, you know? So the argument there implicitly, it's not really said out loud, is that the problem with the police and with policing and with unjust laws in our country is decentralization and irrationality. The problem is that these local police stations, I should say, and individual police officers are allowed to act on their own accord. And when acting on their own accord, they make decisions in the moment based on their own sort of common sense judgment. And their decisions are often guided by these irrational subconscious biases. And they need that to be sort of stomped out. They need to be forced to follow rational, higher legal orders, clear written rules, formal rules need to be established rather than this informal, spontaneous, common sense thing. You know, realistically, part of what makes any action illegal is literally whether or not you get caught and whether or not an individual police officer thinks you look suspicious, right? So jaywalking is illegal, but it's only illegal if a police officer sees somebody jaywalking and wants to stop them for jaywalking for some reason. So I kind of disagree that this is the problem. I think that there are other ways of looking at this, right? One problem you could say is that police officers are too detached from their communities. A lot of times we're seeing white police officers shoot unarmed black men, right? Well, how did it get to be the case that such a portion of the police department was white, right? It's probably that the police department covers multiple like neighborhoods or cities, and that one of those cities or neighborhoods is majority people of color, but that the police officers chosen to police it are not actually from that neighborhood and do not actually know that neighborhood and aren't invested in that neighborhood. I think that them being distant from the neighborhoods that they govern actually could create more problems. And if you take this to its natural conclusion, you kind of go to like community policing is a doctrine, but even farther than that, you could go to community control of the police. You could select people at random from these neighborhoods to hold the police accountable in their local community, and they decide how their communities get policed. You could even go farther and de-professionalize the police, right? I think a lot of people, they're saying the problem is, oh, they only get 6 months of training. You know, they don't get enough training. If we trained them better, they'd be better police officers. But I'm not sure about that. I think maybe the problem is that they're not ordinary people from the communities, and they should probably be cycled out. If we deprofessionalize the police, we could have ordinary people sort of take turns doing the policing, and then more people from the community would know what it's like to be a police officer, and vice versa. Police officers would know what it's like to be of the community. There would be a local shared knowledge of what policing is. It should be noted that none of what I'm suggesting, actually solves unjust laws. If there are unjust laws, like on a state or a federal level, that just make police officers have to enforce them, right? Then obviously local control can't do anything about that. It can only change the way things are being policed, right? But are unjust laws coming from communities? I don't think so. You know, the state of California legalized marijuana and the federal government still raids them. So maybe sometimes more just laws can come from the bottom up, can come from lower levels. So are we really this confident that the solution is always to change things from above? Or could communities governing themselves be better off? I really don't understand the idea that a black community is going to have more unjust laws policing disproportionately the black community than it would if it were more controlled by a white majority state or federal government. I don't think that makes any sense. So I think that it should also be noted that a lot of the alternative reforms are also just changing how policing works, right? Racial bias sensitivity training often shows no results, right? Leftists criticize it all the time for showing no results. And a big part of the reason it shows no results is because it doesn't matter how sensitive you are to someone's oppression if you still have to enforce the same laws upon the same communities. Like, you can't just train a broken system out of the individuals who enforce it. So deprofessionalizing, I think, is the direction we need to move in, not professionalizing. And I think more work should be done to articulate that, because there's very little work being done to articulate that. There's a lot of abolitionist work, but that's kind of a different thing, right? It's kind of different to call for the abolition of police than to call for community control and deprofessionalization. And not enough of the literature acknowledges that those are clearly different things.